Welcome everybody. I wanted to do a little video on focusing on your training and specifically on cleaning up your mechanics and your basic communication with your dog and how you go about your training sessions to maximize their learning, minimize their frustration, and to advance things smoothly. So, the first thing I wanted to talk about are mechanics. So, what are mechanics? Well, these are the protocols that you go through when you are training your dog. It is the steps that you put in place, the plans that you put in place for what you're expecting, when you're reinforcing, how you're reinforcing, all of those little details that are so important. One of the things that I see most frequently in videos of homework is that the mechanics are a little sloppy. And when these are a little sloppy, what happens is there's some confusion, there's added stress on the dog, there is late reinforcement, late marking of behaviors, or missing behaviors entirely, just because we don't have all these things ready. So, to specifically talk about a couple of things regarding mechanics, one is have a plan in place. So, when you are getting ready to do a training session with your dog, know what you're training, know what you are planning to do. What is the goal? What type of rewards are you giving? Where are you giving the rewards? What are your marker cues? All of these things. Have a plan set so you're not going at things just willy nilly. Next, know the in performance goal. Okay, know what you're working towards, and what the end goal would be, and know that it's not going to be a linear progression towards that goal. There's going to be ups and downs, but we want to be generally moving forward as much as possible. So have that in mind and make sure every little thing that you're doing with your dog is working towards that goal and not undoing things. Have in your mind your criteria for reinforcement, okay, which is different than knowing your end goal. Know those little ladder rungs that you're going to take, those little steps, and of how you're going to progress those things. So, okay, before you begin, go, okay, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this behavior, and I want to advance it by getting to this behavior and knowing what steps you're going to take in between for that reinforcement. Know when and how you're going to mark the behavior. All right. So it goes hand in hand with having your mind, your criteria for reinforcement is, like I said, knowing when and how you're going to mark that behavior. So we'll get into markers in a moment, but if you're looking at a basic behavior like cone circling, no, well, this is a behavior I'm wanting. When my dog is in X position, that is when I am going to mark the behavior, so that you're doing it at the exact moment the dog is doing the behavior that you want, and not too late, so that you're actually reinforcing and marking an incorrect behavior. Be prepared and have reinforcement ready. Don't go digging in those pockets, okay? So this is a real big one for me. I see it whether I've got students that are in a class scenario, running a course, and then over the last jump, they're digging in the pocket for the toy or the treats, or working on shaping a behavior and going, oh crap, I ran out of cookies. And then the whole rhythm of everything gets off beat, because now we have the distraction of trying to get more reinforcement ready. So have it ready. Have it in your hands. Have it accessible. A bait bag or something that you can easily grab into, or have multiple cookies in your hand. Be ready to go. Don't give a click and then go, oh, but wait a minute. Let me dig in the pockets for the cookies. Have them ready. Also, when you're working on shaping behaviors, make sure you initiate the activity. Now, that's different than prompting it or luring the dog. It's make sure that, let's say again, going back to the concept of circling a cone, there's a cone. I don't want to let my dog kind of have at it before I am ready. All right. So I want to keep my dog occupied, maybe have him on a sit or a down stay, get the cone, get everything ready, be all set, release the dog, reward them, release them. Yay, good dog. All right, now we're ready to work. Okay. that goes also in mind, and we're going to talk in a moment about training loops, but it's also the concept of after you are working a particular skill or behavior, um, don't, again, while you are trying to get ready, with cookies and get things in set in place, now you've missed your dog offering the behavior 3 or 4 times. Okay, that's going to add to their frustration. So make sure you're separating, and actively um, initiating for the dog to now offer the behavior, or to go into that next mode of what we're wanting to do, versus the dog is offering and we're not ready for it. Okay. And then the main thing is we also want to make sure we're building off of success. So I kind of like to keep in mind the two failures rule. If I have two unsuccessful attempts at something, then okay, all I'm doing is practicing it not being correct. And so if I'm stuck, or I'm not progressing, or I am regressing and I'm getting failed attempts, then I'm just going to back up and ask for that easier behavior, or reinforce the behavior when it's a little easier, or go do something else I know my dog can be successful with, and then return to this later. Sometimes it's best just to take a break and just let it sit for a while, and not try to push your way through it. Okay, moving on. I want to now talk about markers. All right, what are markers? So, some people call them marker cues, and then I think what happens is people get a little confused as to a marker versus a cue for a behavior. So, thinking about a cue for the dog to do a behavior would be sit down, whatever the word might be. Your marker is the thing that tells the dog in that instant that what they're doing is correctly and they're going to get rewarded for it. Okay, so let me go ahead and start into this here. These are not cues for the dog to initiate a behavior. Okay, I'm not going to ask my dog to sit by clicking, right? It is not a cue for a behavior. It is a marker that what they did was correct. So these are signaling the exact moment the desired behavior has been performed. Think about what your markers are. Click when we're shaping behaviors. Yes. If I'm using a manners minder, it's a beep. Okay, so think about what those marker cues are. We're going to get into those in just a moment here. But they are a set grouping of signals that tells the animal that at that moment it is correct. Think about marine mammals. It's a whistle, or it might be something else. But it's that moment is what they did is correct. Reward is a coming. All right, so in that respect, general praise is not a marker. All right, I can say, "Yay, good dog! That was super! That was so good!" That's kind of emotionally telling my dog I'm happy about what's going on, that they're on the right track, but it's not precise. So, yay, good dog, super, woohoo! All of those things, not markers. That's just general praise. Think about how your marker cues are not just marking the exact moment the desired behavior has been performed, but they can also define how and where reinforcement is to be given. All right. And they may or may not end the behavior. All right. So, to think about this a little bit more, and this has been something that's helped me tremendously this last year, is just defining these better, particularly with my youngest dog, Arrow, because he's kind of learned this more from the beginning, and it's been a great thing for him. So, thinking about marker cues, does the marker cue end the behavior? And what does it tell the dog about how they're getting reinforcement? All right. So, for example, we think about a click. Okay, whether we do it with our mouth, or we have a clicker, or whatever it is. Oftentimes, boom, that was correct. Here's your treat. Okay, a treat could be tossed, it could be given from my hand, but what it does is it ends the behavior. That was great, get your reward. Okay, yes tends to be along those same lines. Yes, here's your reward, here's your cookie. Or here is whatever reinforcement I'm presenting to you. There are times when you don't want the behavior to end. Let's say you're working a sit-stay and you want to be able to give the dog a signal that tells them what you're doing is correct, but it also needs to tell them, but don't stop doing it. So those are called duration markers. Um, and so it's something that you would teach separately. It also needs to be a novel word, not something that's said very often. So when I started using these, I said nice. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I say nice job, very nice. That was so nice. I say nice way too much for it to be a novel marker cue. So I went to sweet. Sweet. So when I'm working a sit stay or I'm working stationing with my dog where he's, remaining on a platform while I'm working another dog, my marker cue is sweet. And what that means is what you're doing is great. I am going to bring you a reward, but it's not a release from that behavior. Okay, so keep doing that behavior. Keep doing it down. So it's for stationary behaviors, not things that we are wanting the dog to do once, like take a jump or wrap a cone or whatever it might be. But thinking about cleaning those up. You can also define, like I said, how and where the reinforcement is to be given. So, for example, I use get it is my marker cue that what you did is good. Get your toy. And a toy could be given from my hand or it could be already on the ground, but it is a marker cue that allows the dog to then immediately go get their reward, their toy instead of food. I don't say get it when I'm using a treat. So anyway, those are things that we can just clean up a little bit, or a lot, and make sure the dogs understand a little bit better. Okay, moving on. I want to touch briefly on training loops. This is specifically when you are working a particular skill. There's a lot of examples that we can bring into it. It kind of depends on what class that you're in, as to what really you're focusing on. Before I get into this, though, I do want to give a shout out to my friends Liz Randall and Rachel Downs. They do an amazing seminar called Better Reinforcement Strategies. And if you think this little video I've done is detailed, I mean, this is 2 days of intensive how we can just be better trainers for our dogs. And it is wonderful. I've been training dogs for many years, and it showed to me just how much more improvement I could make in my own training with my dogs, in teaching them new skills and reinforcing and overall improving their understanding and fluency and everything. So if you ever get a chance to go to one of their seminars or host one, I highly recommend it. We did it for our students at our facility, and everybody raved about it. So it's been a great thing. So as I'm getting into the training loops, I'm going to be sharing a diagram that Liz drew, and I got her permission to share it with you guys just because it's such a good visual. All right, so what are training loops? Well, training loops are exactly this. They are loops. Now, a couple things about them. When we start a behavior, especially if it's something the dog knows, we're starting right here. So we're not starting with any of this stuff where we're marking and rewarding and releasing. We're starting usually with the cue, or actually we might be starting with setting into that behavior, which we'll get to in a second. So we give the cue, and in this behavior, Liz used the example of a 2 on 2 off behavior. All right, so maybe the marker, or not the marker cue, maybe the cue for the behavior is feet. The dog does the behavior. As they do the behavior, we mark it. Now, let's think about that marker. Usually, like I said, yes tends to be an end of behavior, which then we just go straight into the reward. So the yes also releases the dog from that behavior. If I want my dog to continue doing that behavior until I release, I will give my sweet cue. Sweet, I'm coming back, giving you the reward. Wait for my release before leaving. So in this, it's almost a little, not a loop, it's almost a little, if this, then that. If your marker cue is a cue that ends the behavior, you go straight into reward. If your marker cue is a duration cue, or a duration marker, which means I'm going to come back and give you the reward, and continue doing that behavior. Then you would go straight into release after you give the dog the reward. So that's why she kind of has this at this point is, do you go to reward or do you go to release and then reward? That's kind of all tied together depending on your marker. And then we get to the point where we reset into this. So when we're working loops, it's not working, I'm going to run a whole course, or I'm going to do, it possibly could be, but that's a lot of behaviors to be working on. I like to use the example of working weave pole training. So if you're doing 2x2 weave poles, or running contact training, or table training, whatever, it's where you're working like more of a specific skill. Thinking about these loops, if you can do nice loops where they're clean loops, where it's boom, 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 back into it, cue, behavior, mark, reward, reset, cue, behavior, it just kind of goes in a loop, a continuous loop. What happens is you get to do a lot more, turns at it. Okay, you get to do more repetition at it. That clean repetition, kind of sets that behavior in the dog's mind even better. You can get to build off of reward. Okay. And it progresses training amazingly quickly. Liz and Rachel helped me a lot working with arrows, running dog walk, and making sure I was clean and timing and coming back and looping back into working just the ramp. And boy, it progressed our training really quickly. Now, I want to talk about this reset. Okay. The reset, also called transport, getting back into initiating the behavior again. Now, what we tend to do with our dogs is, and Liz could almost do another one if we're shaping the behavior, because this one is actually if the dog already knows the behavior. So if I was doing one and I was shaping the behavior, I would wait for the behavior, right? Wait for the dog to offer the behavior. So I'm not actually cueing. I'm just waiting for the behavior that's desired. I will mark it, I will reward it, and I'm going to reset into it again. So we almost would take this cue section out of it. Okay. The thing that happens is, we see a lot of from the point where the dog does the behavior and we reward it, then this resetting or transporting into where we're wanting them to offer that behavior again gets super messy. So like I talked earlier, we are either digging our pocket to get more cookie, the dog is off sniffing somewhere, or they're offering the behavior or other things that we're not noticing or we're not reinforcing. Or they start getting frustrated and they bark, or they just leave, or they're offering other behaviors. And then what happens is that junk, that stuff that we don't want, okay, which tends to be built up a little bit of frustration or stress. Hey, you're leaving me hanging here. What am I supposed to be doing? Now, when we go from that junk stuff that we get back into this loop, that junk gets tied into it. All right. So if I've got a dog that's a little frustrated, maybe I've not been very clear, and maybe they're getting anxious and stressed about things. Now, all of a sudden, that stress is now tied to this behavior. All right. A good example I had when I was working harder weave entries with Moose was, I was giving him the cue. He was getting a little stressed. No, you're not getting it. Get back here and do it again. Get back here, do it again. You know this. Come on. All of a sudden, I was tying into that a bunch of stress and frustration, so that when he started to hear me say the cue weave, it actually cued him to get a little stressed and frustrated, just because that had been tied into our loops. All right. So you got to think on a very basic level of behavior, what's getting reinforced for the dog. Okay. So, if you're doing, again, let's go back to cone circling. If I'm doing cone circling, I'm not to the point where I'm giving a cue, but the dog does the behavior of going around the cone. I mark it. I place the reward. Now, after I place the reward, I need to reset back into it. That's why we do the reset cookie. You could have them come touch a hand and reward that behavior, and then you're ready to go again. But just, it needs to be fluid from one step to the next, without any downtime where you're not focused on your dog or engaged with them. Okay. When you're, let's say, if you're running a little sequence and something goes bad, think about fix and go that all the organizations are now allowing us to do, and the various ways they're calling it: fix and go, fix and continue, repeat and move on, whatever it is. Thinking about making those loops. So we had a trial where the weave entry wasn't hard, but it was the different colored solid poles, and the base was blending in with the dirt, which is not something a lot of our dogs from my training facility have seen, because it's white base on green turf. So it was hard for a lot of the dogs. And so even Moosey had issue with it. So when that happened, I was able to just loop back into a couple obstacles easily ahead of time and go right back into it. And Moose really never knew that he made a mistake, right? It wasn't frustrating. It wasn't stressful for him. He was able just to loop right back into it without it being, no, Ron, get back over here. Come and do this again, right? It was like, whoop, let's just go back around and try it again without breaking flow. All right. So when we're talking about loops, we're talking about good flow and never allowing them to have junk behavior that's adding into it. All right. Whew. Okay. Well, that was a lot. I hope that this kind of is a lot of food for thought for you guys, thinking about how you are interacting with your dogs in these training sessions, and how you can be clearer and more consistent, and a little bit more efficient with your training. So let me know if you have any questions on this. I'm happy to answer them, and maybe think about how you're applying this with your own dogs.